Human history was supposed to move in a straight line, primitive people slowly becoming modern, crude tools evolving into advanced technology. But archaeology keeps uncovering things that do not fit that story. Walls built with impossible precision thousands of years before industrial machinery. Underground structures that still maintain stable temperatures without electricity. Ancient pigments and mortars surviving longer than some modern materials. Water systems that continue functioning centuries after the civilizations that designed them vanished. The deeper researchers dig, the stranger the contradiction becomes. Many of these societies should not have possessed engineering knowledge at this level according to conventional history. Yet the evidence exists in stone, metal and architecture that still refuses to collapse. And perhaps the most unsettling part is that certain discoveries do not look like lost experiments from primitive cultures. They look like fragments of knowledge from civilizations that understood far more about construction, astronomy and survival than we are comfortable admitting today. Dmanisi, known as one of the most disturbing archaeological discoveries ever found outside Africa, completely changed the timeline of human evolution. Beneath the ruins of a medieval fortress in southern Georgia, archaeologists uncovered ancient human remains dating back nearly 1.8 million years. Before this discovery, scientists believed early humans only left Africa after developing larger brains, advanced hunting abilities, and more sophisticated technology. Dmanisi shattered that theory almost instantly. The first major discoveries began in 1991, when Georgian archaeologist David Lord Kipanidze and his team uncovered human fossils buried alongside primitive stone tools and extinct animal bone. Using volcanic ash dating and paleomagnetic analysis, researchers confirmed the remains were approximately 1.77 million years old, making Dmanisi one of the oldest known human sites outside Africa. But the age of the site was not the most shocking part. The real mystery was the type of humans discovered there. The skulls found at Dmanisi possessed extremely small brain sizes ranging from roughly 546 to 650 cubic centimeters. Modern humans average around 1,350 cubic centimeters, while even later Homo erectus fossils often exceeded 900 cubic centimeters. Scientists previously believed large brains were necessary before humans could survive outside Africa. Yet the individuals at Dmanisi looked physically primitive, almost too primitive to survive in such harsh conditions. Some of their features resembled Homo habilis more than fully developed Homo erectus. Despite this, they somehow crossed thousands of kilometers into Eurasia nearly 2 million years ago. That contradiction became the central mystery of Dmanisi. How could humans with such primitive anatomy travel so far with almost no technology? The stone tools discovered at the site only deepened the mystery. Archaeologists found extremely simple Oldowan tools made from broken stones and sharp flakes. These were among the most primitive tools ever associated with human migration outside Africa. There was no evidence of advanced weapons, agriculture, architecture, or metalworking. Even the controlled use of fire remains uncertain at Dmanisi. Compared to later ancient technologies, these tools looked unbelievably crude. Yet these humans survived in an environment far colder and more dangerous than the African landscapes where earlier human ancestors evolved. Animal fossils from the site revealed a brutal prehistoric environment filled with rhinoceroses, deer, giant ostriches, saber-toothed cats, and large predators. Cut marks on bones proved the humans used stone tools to process meat, suggesting they scavenged or hunted animals for survival. Seasonal conditions in the Caucasus region would have been far harsher than tropical Africa. According to older scientific theories, humans this primitive should never have adapted successfully to such conditions. Dmanisi proved otherwise. One of the most controversial discoveries came in 2013 with the publication of Skull 5, one of the most complete ancient human skulls ever found. The skull possessed a strange combination of features including a large face, massive jaw, thick brow ridges, and an unusually small brain case. What made the fossil so important was that it did not fit neatly into any known category of early humans. For decades, scientists separated ancient human fossils into multiple species such as Homo habilis, Homo rudolfensis, and Homo erectus. But researchers studying Skull 5 proposed a dangerous idea. They suggested these species might not actually be separate species at all. Instead, they may simply represent natural variation within a single evolving human population. If true, large sections of the human evolutionary tree taught for decades could be fundamentally wrong. The discovery triggered intense debate across the scientific world. Some paleoanthropologists argued Menisi showed that early humans were far more physically diverse than previously believed. Others rejected the theory completely. Even today, Skull 5 remains one of the most controversial fossils in human evolution. Another discovery at Menisi revealed something even stranger about the origins of humanity. Archaeologists found the skull of an elderly individual who had lost nearly all teeth years before death. In primitive conditions, this should have meant certain starvation. Without teeth, chewing meat and tough plants would have been nearly impossible. Yet the individual survived for a long period after losing those teeth. This suggests that other members of the group may have cared for the individual by sharing food or helping them survive. If correct, social cooperation and compassion may have existed nearly 1.8 million years ago. That possibility completely changed how researchers viewed early humans. Menisi suggested humanity may have survived not because early humans were stronger or smarter, but because they learned to help one another far earlier than expected. Another fascinating aspect of Menisi is the location itself. The same hill later became home to medieval settlements, stone fortresses, churches, tunnels, and trade routes connecting Europe and Asia. Across nearly 2 million years, humans repeatedly returned to this exact place. Few archaeological sites preserve such an enormous timeline of human occupation layered within one location. Even after decades of research, Menisi continues to raise questions science cannot fully answer. Researchers still debate which species lived there, how these primitive humans traveled such vast distances, whether they controlled fire, and why they succeeded despite possessing such simple technology. Most importantly, Menisi forced scientists to confront a disturbing possibility. Human evolution may never have followed the clean and orderly path shown in textbooks. Buried beneath the ruins of medieval Georgia, Menisi revealed evidence that the first humans who left Africa may not have been advanced explorers at all. They may have been fragile survivors with primitive tools, small brains, and almost no technology. Against every scientific expectation, they crossed and may have rewritten the entire story of human evolution. Tidis stands high above the valleys of northeastern Algeria near modern Constantine. Major archaeological excavations officially began there in 1941 under French archaeologist André Berthier, revealing the remains of one of the strangest Roman-era cities ever discovered in North Africa. Unlike most Roman settlements built on flat ground with organized grid systems, Tidis was constructed directly onto a steep mountainside filled with cliffs, broken rock, and dangerous elevation changes. Even today, the city looks less like a normal Roman settlement and more like a fortress carved into the side of a mountain. The site originally began as a Numidian settlement before becoming connected to Roman-controlled Cirta, modern Constantine, during Rome's expansion into North Africa in the 1st century BC. Archaeologists uncovered baths, temples, reservoirs, workshops, inscriptions, and homes spread across narrow terraces cut directly into the mountain. But the biggest mystery surrounding Tidis is simple. Why would ancient engineers build a city in a place this difficult when easier land existed nearby? The geography alone created enormous construction problems. Many parts of Tidis are so steep that builders had to carve stairways directly into solid limestone just to move between sections of the city. Streets twist unnaturally around cliffs instead of following the straight urban planning normally associated with Roman engineering. Entire buildings were forced onto narrow artificial platforms cut from the rock itself. This makes Tidis very different from famous Roman cities such as Timgad, where streets follow nearly perfect geometric layouts. At Tidis, the mountain controlled the city instead of the engineers controlling the landscape. Modern archaeologists believe enormous amounts of labor would have been required to stabilize slopes, carve pathways, and prevent structural collapse. One of the most fascinating mysteries is the water system. Northern Algeria experiences long dry seasons, yet Tidis survived for centuries on a rocky mountain with no major nearby river. Archaeologists discovered cisterns, underground reservoirs, drainage systems, and rainwater channels carved directly into stone. These systems collected seasonal rainfall and stored it for long periods. Some storage chambers still survive after nearly 2,000 years, including waterproof interior coatings that remain surprisingly durable. Similar hydraulic engineering existed elsewhere in the Roman world, but building such a system on steep terrain made the challenge far more difficult. Historians still debate how ancient builders managed water loss, pressure, and storage efficiency in such a harsh environment. The stairways of Tidis create another mystery. Many are extremely narrow and sharply angled, making movement difficult even today. Some paths feel more defensive than practical, almost resembling military routes instead of normal city streets. This has led some researchers to believe the settlement may have been chosen partly for protection. Any invading force would have struggled to move through the vertical maze of stone staircases and confined passages. Another important mystery involves the city's cultural origins. Before Roman control, the region belonged to the Numidian kingdoms of North Africa. Archaeologists believe the Romans may have expanded an older settlement rather than building Tidis entirely from scratch. Some architectural elements differ from standard Roman urban design and appear influenced by earlier Numidian traditions. This mixture of cultures makes Tidis historically important because it shows how Rome adapted local civilizations instead of simply replacing them. The city became a fusion of Roman engineering and North African traditions, creating an urban style rarely seen elsewhere in the empire. Religious discoveries at the site add even more mystery. Excavations revealed evidence connected to Mithraism, a secretive Roman cult popular among soldiers between the 1st and 4th centuries AD. Mithraic worship often occurred inside underground chambers designed to resemble caves. Historians still know very little about many of the religion's rituals because followers kept ceremonies hidden from outsiders. The presence of Mithric influence in such an isolated mountain city suggests Tidis may have held strategic importance within Roman military networks across North Africa. Some researchers believe soldiers, traders, and travelers moving through the region helped spread these secret religious practices. Despite centuries of erosion, earthquakes, and abandonment, parts of Tidis remain remarkably stable. Retaining walls, carved stairways, and terraces still cling to the mountainside after nearly 2,000 years. This survival suggests ancient builders possessed a sophisticated understanding of terrain adaptation and structural balance. Instead of forcing rigid designs onto unstable land, they shaped the city around the mountain itself. By the late Roman period, Tidis slowly declined and was eventually abandoned. Political instability and economic collapse weakened many settlements across North Africa during the later centuries of the empire. Over time, the mountain city faded from history, leaving only ruins overlooking the valleys below. Earthquakes have repeatedly destroyed eastern Anatolia for centuries, yet parts of Pazinla Castle still remain standing after nearly 1,000 years of war, freezing winters, and continuous rebuilding. That is the first mystery surrounding this forgotten frontier fortress. Located near Erzurum in eastern Turkey, Pazinla Castle sits directly on one of the most important military corridors connecting Anatolia, the Caucasus, and Persia. Historians believe the fortress was originally constructed during the Byzantine period around the 10th or 11th century, although several foundations beneath the visible walls may be older. Over time, the site passed through Byzantine, Armenian, Seljuk, Mongol, and Ottoman control, with each civilization rebuilding sections of the fortress instead of destroying it completely. The result is a structure so heavily modified that modern archaeologists can no longer determine what the original castle actually looked like. That layered construction became one of the castle's greatest archaeological mysteries. Certain wall sections use Byzantine masonry techniques, while other portions clearly show Seljuk-era stonework and Ottoman repairs. Some stones appear darker and more weathered than the surrounding walls, suggesting multiple construction phases separated by centuries. Researchers studying Eastern Anatolian fortresses discovered that Pazinla is not a single fortress from one civilization, but a military structure continuously reshaped by different empires trying to hold the same strategic valley. Unlike famous sites restored into clean tourist landmarks, Pazinla still looks fragmented and unfinished, almost like several castles fused together over hundreds of years. The most unusual feature of the fortress may be its survival against earthquakes. Erzurum lies close to major fault systems in eastern Turkey, a region that has experienced destructive seismic activity throughout recorded history. Entire cities across Anatolia collapsed from earthquakes, yet the central core of Pazinla Castle endured. Historians comparing the site with other Byzantine and Armenian strongholds noticed that several surviving walls use unusually thick stone cores filled with compact rubble and flexible mortar. Some defensive walls measure several meters thick. Researchers believe this construction style may have unintentionally absorbed seismic shock better than rigid stone structures. Similar techniques appear at ancient fortresses such as Annie and Van Fortress, where massive walls survived repeated tremors that destroyed surrounding settlements. The engineering mystery becomes even more impressive considering the climate. Winters in Erzurum are among the harshest in Turkey. Temperatures regularly fall below -20 degrees Celsius, while snowstorms can isolate mountain regions for weeks. A fortress operating in these conditions required advanced survival systems simply to function. Soldiers stationed inside the castle needed protected water sources, food storage, heating and shelter capable of surviving long winters and military sieges at the same time. Yet many of those systems are now missing. Archaeologists suspect underground cisterns and storage chambers once existed beneath the fortress. Similar Byzantine and Seljuk castles across Anatolia used hidden water reservoirs carved into stone to prevent freezing during winter. Some redirected mountain runoff into underground chambers protected from the cold. At Pazinla, traces of buried sections beneath the visible ruins suggest that parts of the fortress may still remain underground. Uneven terrain inside the site and blocked stone passages have led some researchers to suspect the existence of sealed chambers or forgotten tunnels below the castle. However, large-scale excavation has never been fully completed, meaning the underground structure of Pazinla remains largely unknown. Its position also reveals why so many empires fought to control it. The fortress overlooked a major route used by armies moving between eastern and western Anatolia. From its elevated position, defenders could monitor movement across the valley and potentially warn nearby fortresses of approaching invasions. Byzantine military strategy during the 10th and 11th centuries relied heavily on frontier strongholds, like Pazinla, to defend the empire's eastern borders. After the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, when the Seljuk Turks defeated the Byzantine Empire and permanently changed Anatolia's history, castles across the region became even more important. Pazinla stood directly inside this unstable frontier zone where civilizations collided for centuries. Some historians believe the fortress may have functioned as more than just a defensive structure. Several observation points inside the castle provide unusually wide visibility across the surrounding landscape. Certain towers appear positioned primarily for long-distance surveillance rather than direct combat. This has led researchers to suggest that Pazinla may once have been connected to regional communication networks using fire signals or messengers between nearby strongholds. Similar systems existed across Byzantine frontier territories where warning signals could travel rapidly across mountain fortresses during invasions. The stonework itself presents another unresolved puzzle. Some surviving wall sections display surprisingly precise stone fitting despite centuries of collapse and reconstruction. Medieval builders in eastern Anatolia often worked with volcanic stone that was extremely durable but difficult to shape accurately. Transporting massive stone blocks across mountainous terrain without modern machinery would have required enormous labor and coordination. Researchers still debate how frontier kingdoms under constant military threat managed to construct and maintain fortresses on this scale. Unlike famous ancient sites associated with temples or royal palaces, Pazinla Castle represents something colder and more practical. Every part of the fortress appears designed for survival. Thick walls, elevated sightlines, possible underground storage systems, and continuous reconstruction all point toward one purpose: enduring war on a dangerous frontier. Even the architecture reflects constant adaptation rather than beauty. Each empire repaired whatever already existed, because rebuilding an entirely new fortress in such a hostile environment would have been nearly impossible. That may explain why the castle still feels mysterious today. Modern archaeology has not fully uncovered its underground sections. Historians still debate its original appearance, and no one knows exactly how many times its walls were destroyed and rebuilt across centuries of conflict and earthquakes. What survives on the hill above Pazinla is not the remains of one civilization, but the layered skeleton of multiple empires fighting over the same strategic corridor for hundreds of years. More than 40 kilometers southeast of modern Turpan in Xinjiang, western China, the ruins of Gaochang rise from one of the harshest environments in Asia. Summers in the Turpan Depression regularly exceed 45 degrees Celsius. Rainfall is extremely limited, and powerful desert winds constantly erode the landscape. Yet for more than 1,000 years, Gaochang survived as a major city along the Silk Road. Archaeologists believe the settlement first appeared during the 1st century BC under the Han Dynasty, later expanding into a fortified trade metropolis that connected China, Central Asia, Persia, and the Buddhist world. The most disturbing mystery surrounding Gaochang is not how it disappeared, it is how it survived at all. Unlike cities built beside massive rivers such as the Nile or Euphrates, Gaochang existed in a region where large-scale urban life should have been nearly impossible. The city depended on a sophisticated underground water network known today as the Kariz system. Thousands of vertical shafts were dug deep into the earth and connected through underground tunnels that carried meltwater from the Tian Shan Mountains across enormous distances beneath the desert surface. By moving water underground, ancient engineers prevented evaporation under the brutal heat of the Turpan Basin. Modern surveys show some Kariz channels stretched for several kilometers with gradients so precise that water could continue flowing naturally without mechanical pumps. Even a small miscalculation in angle could stop the system entirely. Archaeologists still debate how ancient workers managed to maintain accurate slopes across such distances without modern surveying technology. Many sections of the system survived for centuries, and parts of Xinjiang's Kariz networks continued functioning into the 20th century. The engineering becomes even more mysterious when compared with the environment surrounding Gaochang. Roman aqueducts transported water through elevated stone channels across Mediterranean climates. Persian Qanat systems also used underground tunnels, but Gaochang existed in a far more extreme desert basin where summer surface temperatures could become lethal. Without these hidden water tunnels, the city would almost certainly have collapsed within decades. Ancient Chinese records from the Tang dynasty describe Gaochang as a wealthy oasis kingdom positioned directly on one of the most important Silk Road routes. Merchants carrying silk, jade, spices, horses, glassware, and precious metals moved through the city for centuries. What makes Gaochang unique is that it did not belong entirely to one civilization. Archaeological discoveries reveal a strange mixture of Chinese, Sogdian, Turkic, Persian, and Indian influence concentrated inside a single desert metropolis. Excavations uncovered documents written in multiple languages, including Chinese and Sogdian texts. Buddhist manuscripts, trade contracts, official records, and personal letters were preserved by the desert's dry climate. Some historians describe Gaochang as one of the most multicultural cities in ancient Asia. Instead of functioning as a simple Chinese frontier settlement, it became a crossroads where civilizations merged together in ways rarely seen elsewhere during antiquity. This cultural fusion also appeared in religion. Buddhism flourished around Gaochang for centuries, especially between the 4th and 8th centuries AD. Pilgrims traveling between India and China stopped in the region, while temples and monasteries expanded across the oasis. One of the most famous visitors was the monk Xuanzang, who passed through Gaochang around AD 630 during his journey toward India in search of Buddhist scriptures. Historical accounts describe the king of Gaochang personally welcoming him and attempting to persuade him to remain in the kingdom permanently. Near the city, archaeologists discovered cave temples and murals buried beneath layers of sand and erosion. Many paintings still contain traces of vivid pigments despite surviving more than 1,000 years in an exposed desert environment. The survival of these murals continues to surprise conservation experts because the region experiences severe temperature fluctuations capable of destroying ancient plaster and paint. Some researchers believe the extreme dryness paradoxically preserved the artwork, while simultaneously threatening the structures themselves. The city's architecture presents another major mystery. Most of Gaochang was constructed using rammed earth and mud brick rather than massive stone. Under normal conditions, such materials deteriorate relatively quickly. Yet enormous sections of Gaochang's defensive walls still remain standing after centuries of desert storms, earthquakes, and temperature extremes. Portions of the outer walls once reached heights of more than 11 meters, surrounding a city that covered roughly 2 million square meters. Researchers studying the walls discovered that ancient builders compacted layers of earth with remarkable density, creating structures resistant to erosion and thermal stress. Similar techniques appeared in parts of Persia and Central Asia, but Gaochang demonstrates these methods on an unusually large urban scale. Some engineers argue that the thermal properties of rammed earth may have helped regulate indoor temperatures naturally, allowing residents to survive the severe desert climate long before modern cooling systems existed. Another unsettling mystery surrounding Gaochang comes from the broader Turpan region itself. The desert conditions preserved human remains with extraordinary detail. Several naturally preserved mummies discovered in Xinjiang retained hair, clothing, facial features, and even traces of skin after thousands of years. Genetic and physical studies of some ancient remains revealed features more commonly associated with Indo-European populations than East Asian groups. These discoveries triggered intense debates among historians and archaeologists. Some researchers believe ancient migration routes across Central Asia were far more complex than previously understood. Others argue the Silk Road connected distant populations centuries before official historical records fully documented those interactions. The presence of multiple ethnic groups near Gaochang suggests the city stood at the center of a cultural exchange zone unlike almost anywhere else in the ancient world. Yet despite its wealth and strategic importance, Gaochang eventually disappeared. During the 13th and 14th centuries, political instability, warfare, shifting trade routes, and environmental pressures gradually weakened the city. As maritime trade expanded, sections of the Silk Road lost importance. Water management systems became harder to maintain. Empires rose and collapsed across Central Asia. Eventually, the population declined, buildings emptied, and the desert slowly reclaimed the oasis metropolis. What makes Gaochang especially haunting is that it did not appear to vanish in a single catastrophic event. Instead, the city seems to have slowly dried out over generations. As though the environment itself was reclaiming territory, humans were never to occupy permanently. Scattered across the rocky hills near Marayur in the Indian state of Kerala, the Muniara dolmens stand in silence like fragments of a civilization that vanished long before recorded history in southern India truly began. Hidden among forests, steep stone slopes, and ancient sandalwood regions, these massive stone chambers are believed to date between roughly 1000 BCE and 300 BCE, during the Iron Age megalithic period of South India. At first glance, the structures appear simple. Several enormous vertical stone slabs support a gigantic capstone placed carefully above them, forming what archaeologists classify as dolmens, a type of megalithic burial monument found in many parts of the world. But the deeper researchers study sites like Muniara, the stranger they become. The greatest mystery surrounding the Muniara dolmens is not simply their age. It is the question of how ancient communities living in the mountains of Kerala transported and balanced multi-ton stone slabs in such difficult terrain more than 2,000 years ago. The hills around Marayur are steep, rocky, and surrounded by dense vegetation. Even today, moving stones of that size through the area would require modern equipment, road access, and coordinated engineering. Yet the builders of Muniara achieved this without cranes, steel tools, or advanced transport systems. Some archaeologists believe the builders may have used wooden rollers, rope systems, and collective human labor to drag the stones uphill. Others suggest they carefully selected naturally fractured rock from nearby outcrops and minimized transport distances. However, no direct evidence has ever been discovered explaining the exact construction method. What makes the mystery even more fascinating is the stability of the structures themselves. The capstones remain balanced on top of the supporting slabs after centuries of monsoon rains, earthquakes, humidity, and erosion. No mortar was used, no metal clamps have been found. The structures survive almost entirely through gravity, geometry, and weight distribution. This type of dry stone engineering appears in some of the world's most mysterious ancient sites, including Stonehenge in England and dolmens of Antequera in Spain. Yet Muniara remains far less studied, making the unanswered questions surrounding it even more intriguing. Unlike famous megalithic sites that have been analysed for centuries, the Kerala dolmens still feel like archaeological shadows hiding beyond the edge of mainstream history. Most scholars classify the Muniara dolmens as burial structures connected to Iron Age communities in South India. Excavations at megalithic sites throughout Kerala and Tamil Nadu have uncovered pottery fragments, iron tools, beads, charcoal remains, and cremated human bones. These discoveries strongly support the idea that the structures were linked to funerary rituals, but the evidence is incomplete. Not every dolmen contains human remains. Some are too small to function as full burial chambers. Others appear to have been reused across generations. This has led some researchers to question whether these structures served purposes beyond simple tombs. In many ancient cultures, stone chambers represented symbolic gateways between worlds. Megalithic tombs across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East often carried ritual or astronomical significance alongside burial functions. At Muniara, the arrangement of the structures and their placement across elevated terrain suggests that location itself may have been spiritually important. The builders deliberately chose mountain ridges overlooking the surrounding valleys, almost as if the dead were meant to remain above the world of the living. Another layer of mystery comes from the orientation of megalithic structures throughout southern India. Several dolmen sites discovered in Kerala and Karnataka show patterns aligned with east-west solar movement. Some entrances appear positioned towards sunrise directions during specific times of the year. Although Muniara has never undergone the same level of astronomical analysis as sites like Stonehenge, archaeologists have long debated whether these alignments were intentional. If they were, it would suggest that the builders possessed a surprisingly advanced understanding of seasonal solar observation, despite leaving behind almost no written records. That possibility transforms the Muniara dolmens from simple graves into something much larger. They may represent part of a forgotten ritual landscape tied to astronomy, death, and sacred geography. Ancient people living in these mountains may have tracked the movement of the sun not for science in the modern sense, but for spiritual timing connected to ceremonies, agriculture, and ancestor worship. One of the strangest aspects of Muniara is how durable the structures remain despite Kerala's harsh climate. The region experiences heavy monsoon rainfall, intense humidity, biological growth, and constant erosion. Many ancient structures made from brick or softer materials disappeared centuries ago under these conditions. Yet the dolmens continue to survive. Their simplicity may actually explain their longevity. The builders avoided fragile decorative features and focused entirely on structural stability. Massive stone slabs resist decay far better than wood or clay, and the weight distribution naturally strengthens the monuments over time. This engineering philosophy can also be seen in places like Sacsayhuaman in Peru and Nan Madol in the Pacific, where ancient builders created structures capable of surviving centuries of environmental stress with little reliance on binding materials. In all of these locations, the precision lies not in decoration, but in understanding how stone behaves under pressure. What makes Muniara even more mysterious is that it was not an isolated construction project. Thousands of megalithic monuments have been discovered across southern India, especially in Kerala, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu. Dolmens, stone circles, menhirs, and underground burial chambers appear throughout the region, suggesting that a vast megalithic culture once spread across the southern peninsula during the Iron Age. Yet, despite the scale of these structures, historians still know remarkably little about the societies that built them. No surviving texts explain their beliefs. No historical chronicles describe their rulers. Archaeologists have recovered artifacts, tools, and burial objects, but the civilization itself remains largely silent. It is one of the greatest paradoxes in Indian archaeology. A culture capable of organizing massive stone construction projects across huge distances somehow vanished without leaving behind a detailed written explanation of its world. Some researchers believe these communities may have contributed to the early development of iron metallurgy in southern India. Iron objects discovered in megalithic burials suggest sophisticated metalworking knowledge long before many outside civilizations reached the region. Others believe the megalithic culture gradually evolved into later South Indian societies, rather than disappearing completely. But the transition remains unclear, and many gaps still exist in the timeline. Blaidaru Fortress sits deep within the Orashti Mountains of modern Romania, surrounded by dense forests and steep ridges that once formed the heart of the ancient Dacian kingdom. Archaeologists believe the fortress was constructed during the reign of King Burebista in the 1st century BC, and later reinforced under King Decebalus shortly before the Dacian wars against Rome between 101 and 106 AD. Today only shattered stone walls and collapsed towers remain. Yet even these ruins reveal something deeply unsettling. Blaidaru was not a primitive hill fort built by scattered tribes. It was part of one of the most advanced military systems in pre-Roman Europe, designed with engineering methods that historians still struggle to fully explain. The most extraordinary mystery surrounding Blaidaru is the construction technique known as murus dasychus. The fortress walls were built using two outer layers of carefully cut limestone blocks with a packed core of rubble and earth between them. Massive wooden beams were inserted horizontally through the structure to lock the stone layers together. At first glance, the system appears simple, but modern engineers studying the surviving walls discovered that it absorbed impacts far more effectively than many standard stone fortifications of the ancient world. Instead of shattering under pressure, the walls could flex slightly and distribute force across the structure. Some researchers have compared this to early seismic resistant engineering. Considering that parts of these walls survived nearly 2,000 years of harsh mountain winters, earthquakes, erosion and warfare, the effectiveness of the design remains astonishing. The precision of the stonework creates another major mystery. Several sections of Blidaru contain blocks weighing hundreds of kilograms positioned on steep mountain terrain, more than 700 meters above sea level. No evidence of cranes, advanced pulleys, or Roman-style engineering machinery has ever been discovered at the site. Yet the stones were aligned with remarkable accuracy. Historians still debate how the Dacians transported these materials through dense forests and narrow mountain paths. Some theories suggest the use of wooden sledges during winter, when frozen ground reduced friction, while others argue large labour networks and sophisticated planning must have existed long before Rome arrived in the region. Whatever the method, Blidaru demonstrates organisational capabilities far beyond the image of a loosely organised tribal society. The fortress itself was designed with unusually advanced defensive logic. Archaeological surveys show that Blidaru contained at least 6 major towers connected by thick defensive walls positioned to create overlapping lines of attack. Any invading force climbing the mountain would have been exposed to missiles from multiple angles simultaneously. The pathways approaching the fortress were narrow and steep, forcing attackers into predictable routes where defenders could easily trap them. This design resembles military strategies later used in medieval mountain fortresses, yet Blidaru predates many of them by more than 1,000 years. One of the most fascinating discoveries is that Blidaru was never intended to stand alone. It formed part of a massive network of Dacian fortresses that included Costesti, Piatra Rossi, Bonitsa, and the capital city of Sarmizegetusa Regia. These fortresses were positioned across mountain ridges with direct visual contact between one another. Historians believe fire and smoke signals could have transmitted warnings across the entire region within minutes. In practical terms, this meant that a Roman advance detected near one fortress could rapidly alert every stronghold in the mountains. For an ancient civilization living in difficult terrain, this functioned almost like an early military communication network. The existence of this defensive system explains why Rome considered Dacia such a dangerous enemy. Emperor Trajan launched 2 enormous campaigns against the Dacians in 111-102 AD and again in 105-106 AD. These wars were among the largest military operations Rome conducted during the early imperial period. More than 10 Roman legions participated, representing tens of thousands of soldiers. Trajan even commissioned the massive bridge over the Danube River, designed by the engineer Apollodorus of Damascus, to maintain supply lines into Dacian territory. Such an investment raises an uncomfortable historical question. If the Dacians were truly technologically inferior tribes, why did Rome require such overwhelming force to defeat them? Blidaru also reveals evidence of long-term survival planning. Archaeologists uncovered water storage systems, food supply areas, and protected internal zones that allowed defenders to withstand prolonged sieges. Unlike many temporary hill forts in Europe, Blidaru appears to have functioned as a permanent military centre. The fortress could continue operating even when isolated deep within hostile mountain territory. Some researchers compare its strategic design to later Byzantine and Crusader strongholds built centuries afterward. Another overlooked mystery involves Dacian metallurgy. Excavations throughout the Urushti Mountains uncovered iron workshops, weapon fragments, and evidence of large-scale metal production. Ancient Roman sources describe Dacian weapons, particularly the falx, as terrifyingly effective against Roman soldiers. The curved blade could penetrate armor so efficiently that Roman troops were eventually forced to reinforce their helmets during the Dacian Wars. This suggests that the Dacians not only understood advanced forging techniques, but also adapted weapons specifically to counter Roman military technology. The surrounding Carpathian landscape adds another layer to the mystery. Dense forests and heavy mountain fog often conceal the ruins entirely. Even today, the fortress can appear suddenly through the trees, like a forgotten military outpost from another age. This isolation helped preserve the site for centuries after the fall of Dacia. Unlike many Roman cities that evolved into modern settlements, Blidaru remained hidden within the mountains, allowing archaeologists to study portions of the fortress without extensive later reconstruction. Modern excavations continue to raise unanswered questions. Large areas surrounding the fortress remain only partially explored due to difficult terrain and limited archaeological funding. Researchers still debate the true population capacity of the stronghold, the full complexity of its signaling network, and the exact methods used to construct its walls. The more Blidaru is studied, the harder it becomes to maintain the traditional image of the Dacians as merely barbarian tribe resisting civilization. Evidence increasingly suggests they possessed sophisticated military engineering, advanced logistics, and a deep understanding of mountain warfare long before Rome conquered the region. In the end, Rome defeated Dacia in 106 AD, and King Decebalus died as the kingdom collapsed under imperial pressure. Yet Blidaru remains standing high in the Carpathian Mountains, as evidence that the conflict was far more complex than ancient Roman propaganda claimed. The fortress reveals a civilization capable of constructing resilient military architecture, organizing regional defense systems, and challenging the greatest empire of its age in terrain, perfectly adapted to survival. Nearly 2,000 years later, the stones of Blidaru still hold mysteries that modern archaeology cannot completely answer. Above the cliffs of the Danube River in eastern Romania stands the ruined fortress of Capodava, one of the strangest military settlements ever built by the Roman Empire. Unlike famous Roman cities designed for trade, politics, or luxury, Capodava existed almost entirely for survival. It was constructed in one of the most dangerous frontier regions of Europe, where invading tribes, freezing winters, and constant warfare repeatedly threatened Rome's northern border. Even today, archaeologists still struggle to explain how this fortress survived for so many centuries in such a hostile environment. Capodava was founded shortly after Emperor Trajan conquered Dacia in AD 106. The fortress became part of the Danubian Limes, the massive chain of Roman military defences stretching across the Danube frontier. Positioned high above the river, Capodava allowed Roman soldiers to monitor trade routes and military movement between the Balkans and the Black Sea region. The location was strategically perfect, but also extremely dangerous. The cliffs were exposed to erosion, violent seasonal weather, and flooding from the Danube. Yet large sections of the walls still survive nearly 2,000 years later. The fortress itself was built using limestone blocks with thick defensive walls and towers placed at strategic angles around the perimeter. Archaeologists discovered that the walls were repeatedly repaired and reinforced over centuries, suggesting Capodava existed in a near-constant state of military pressure. Unlike many Roman forts that followed a relatively fixed design, Capodava changed continuously. Towers were modified, gates were narrowed, sections of wall were thickened after invasion. Some entrances that once allowed wagons and troops to pass freely were later reduced into smaller choke points designed to slow attackers. This is one of the most fascinating mysteries surrounding the site. Capodava looks less like a completed Roman fortress and more like a military structure permanently adapting to survive. Archaeologists believe these modifications were responses to attacks from Goths, Huns, and other migrating groups moving through Eastern Europe during the decline of Roman power. Evidence from different masonry styles shows that entire sections of the fortress were rebuilt multiple times using different construction techniques. Systematic excavations began in the 1920s under Romanian archaeologist Grigore Florescu. What researchers uncovered changed the understanding of the fortress completely. Beneath the visible ruins were multiple occupation layers from different historical periods. Roman military barracks were discovered below later Byzantine structures. Ancient streets had been redesigned several times. Older walls were buried and reused as foundations for newer buildings. Burn layers revealed repeated destruction events followed by reconstruction. Instead of being one fortress from one era, Capodava turned out to be several cities built on top of each other across centuries of conflict. One of the most mysterious discoveries involved underground chambers buried beneath parts of the settlement. Excavations revealed storage rooms and partially collapsed corridors whose exact purposes remain unknown. Some archaeologists believe they were military granaries used during sieges. Others think they may have functioned as hidden supply passages or emergency shelters. What makes the discovery unusual is the scale of some of the underground spaces. For a frontier fortress that was relatively small compared to major Roman cities, several chambers appear unexpectedly large. The Danube River itself may explain why the fortress became so heavily fortified. To Rome, the river was not simply a border. It was one of the empire's most dangerous invasion routes. During severe winters, sections of the Danube could freeze, allowing enemy forces to cross directly over the ice. Ancient records describe barbarian raids occurring under frozen conditions when the natural defense of the river temporarily disappeared. Cappadava therefore had to defend against both human invasions and environmental destruction at the same time. Archaeologists also discovered that Cappadava was more than a military outpost. Coins, ceramics, tools, and imported goods show the settlement had active trade connections across the frontier. Civilian families lived alongside soldiers inside the fortress walls. Workshops and storage buildings suggest the settlement functioned as a small economic center supporting military operations in the region. But life there was clearly unstable. Many structures show evidence of fire and violent destruction. Some buildings appear to have been abandoned suddenly, while others were rebuilt almost immediately after being damaged. Historians believe the fortress experienced repeated attacks during the crisis of the 3rd century, when Roman authority weakened across much of Europe. Later invasions by Goths and Huns likely forced additional reconstructions during the 4th and 5th centuries. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding Cappadava is how it finally disappeared. Unlike places destroyed in single catastrophic events, the fortress appears to have declined slowly over time. Byzantine control weakened in the region after the 6th century. Trade networks shifted, military resources declined, Slavic and Bulgar migrations reshaped Eastern Europe. Eventually, the fortress lost its strategic importance and was abandoned. But what makes Cappadava remarkable is not its fall. It is the fact that the settlement survived at all. Many Roman frontier cities vanished completely after only a few centuries of warfare. Cappadava endured through the Roman Empire, the late Roman period, and the Byzantine era. Its walls preserve evidence of constant adaptation, desperation, and survival across nearly 1,000 years of occupation. Even modern archaeologists continue uncovering new foundations and structures outside the visible fortress walls, suggesting the settlement may have been larger than originally believed. Drone surveys and modern excavation technology are still revealing buried sections hidden beneath the earth near the Danube cliffs. Cappadava does not feel like the glamorous image of ancient Rome often shown in documentaries. It feels colder and far more isolated. This was not a city built to celebrate imperial power. It was a fortress built to resist collapse on the very edge of the known world. That is why the site remains so fascinating today. Cappadava was not destroyed in one dramatic battle. It survived centuries of invasion, climate pressure, and imperial decline before slowly fading from history itself. And in many ways, that slow survival is far more mysterious than a sudden collapse ever could be. Archaeological is one of the most confusing abandoned megastructures in the ancient world. Hidden within the dry grasslands of southern Kazakhstan, the enormous redstone complex was built on a scale that should have belonged to a major empire. Yet historians still cannot explain what it was actually supposed to be. Its walls stretch across hundreds of meters. Multi-ton stone blocks were transported across harsh terrain. Sophisticated water systems were engineered in a semi-arid environment. But the entire project appears to have been abandoned before completion, leaving behind one of the greatest unsolved mysteries connected to the Silk Road world. The ruins are located near the city of Taras, close to ancient Silk Road routes that once connected China, Persia, and the Middle East. Soviet archaeologists began large-scale studies during the 20th century, but the site immediately created problems. The complex was far larger than expected. Thick stone walls surrounded a massive rectangular layout nearly 200 meters wide. Some sections appeared heavily fortified, while others looked ceremonial or administrative. The deeper researchers investigated, the more contradictory the structure became. The first major mystery is the redstone itself. Archaeological was built using enormous reddish sandstone blocks transported from quarries several kilometers away. Some blocks weigh more than a few tons, yet the surrounding landscape is mostly dry open steppe with limited natural resources. Historians still debate how ancient builders moved such heavy materials across this terrain. Unlike forested regions where large timber rollers could be used easily, archaeologists existed in an environment with far fewer logistical advantages. The engineering challenge becomes even stranger when considering the scale of the project. Thousands of massive stones were shaped, transported, aligned, and placed with surprising precision. The amount of labour required would have been enormous, suggesting that Archaeological was once politically or strategically important enough to justify a gigantic state-sponsored construction effort. What makes the mystery deeper is that the complex appears unfinished. Certain walls stop abruptly, some corridors seem incomplete. Multiple interior sections show signs that construction suddenly ended before final decoration or full occupation. Archaeologists discovered evidence that builders may have abandoned the site rapidly, almost as if the project collapsed in the middle of development. But why would an empire invest huge amounts of labour and resources into such an ambitious structure only to leave it incomplete in the middle of nowhere? One theory suggests that Archaeological was linked to the early Arab expansion into Central Asia during the 8th century. Some researchers believe it may have been intended as a military fortress or administrative centre controlling Silk Road trade routes. Others argue the architectural style contains strong Persian and Sogdian influences rather than purely Arab designs. The site combines several cultural traditions at once, creating a strange hybrid architecture that does not fully belong to any single civilization. This has led some historians to describe Archaeological as a crossroads structure, built in a region where multiple empires, religions, and trade networks collided. The water system creates another major puzzle. Archaeological sits in a semi-arid environment where sustaining a large population would have been difficult. Yet archaeologists found traces of sophisticated hydraulic engineering around the site, including canals, reservoirs, and carefully planned water distribution systems. This raises disturbing questions. Why build such a gigantic water infrastructure in such an unforgiving location? Was Archaeological designed for thousands of residents? Was it intended to become a major city? Or did its builders possess access to water management systems far more advanced than historians expected for this region? The complexity of the hydraulic system suggests long-term planning rather than temporary military occupation. Some channels appear engineered to control seasonal flow with surprising efficiency. Similar ancient water management techniques existed in Persia and parts of the Roman world, but Archaeological sits far from the major centres usually associated with those technologies. Once again, the site refuses to fit neatly into conventional historical categories. The layout of the complex only deepens the confusion. Its thick, outer walls resemble defensive architecture, yet many areas inside feel ceremonial rather than military. Large courtyards, symmetrical passageways, and carefully aligned rooms suggest elite or administrative functions. Some historians propose that Archaeological may have been an unfinished palace for a regional ruler attempting to create a new political centre along the Silk Road. Others believe it functioned as a giant caravanserai for merchants moving across Central Asia, but the structure seems too monumental for an ordinary trade station. The amount of labour invested rivals some ancient royal complexes despite the site's isolated position. Satellite imaging and modern archaeological surveys continue revealing additional buried features surrounding the complex, including smaller structures and possible extensions of the water system. This suggests Archaeological may once have been part of a much larger urban vision that was never completed. Some researchers even speculate that environmental collapse or water shortages may have forced abandonment before the city could fully emerge. If true, Archaeological may represent the ruins of an ancient project that failed before history had the chance to remember it. Local legends add another layer to the mystery. Some stories claim the site was cursed and could never be completed. Others describe it as a forgotten fortress, abandoned after a catastrophe. While folklore cannot explain the engineering behind Archaeotas, the persistence of these stories reflects how unusual the ruins appeared even to later generations living nearby. Massive red stone walls standing alone in the empty grasslands must have looked almost supernatural. Today, Archaeotas remains one of the least understood ancient complexes connected to the Silk Road world. Its builders possessed the ability to organize huge labor forces, transport multi-ton stones, and engineer advanced water systems in an unforgiving landscape. Yet their identity, purpose, and ultimate fate remain uncertain. The structure exists almost like a frozen blueprint for a civilization that vanished before completing its vision. And perhaps the strangest part of all is that despite its scale, despite its engineering, and despite its strategic location, Archaeotas was nearly erased from global historical memory, leaving behind only ruins, theories, and one enormous unanswered question. Why was something this massive built here in the first place? 4 months. That is how long Sultan Mehmed II reportedly gave his engineers to build Rumeli Hisari in 1452 before launching the siege of Constantinople. Today, the fortress still stands beside the Bosphorus with walls more than 20 meters high, towers thick enough to survive cannon fire, and foundations locked directly into steep coastal rock. Modern historians still debate how a military structure of that scale could have been completed so quickly using 15th century technology. But the deeper mystery is not the speed of construction. It is what Ottoman builders may have inherited from civilizations that existed long before them. Archaeologists discovered that many Ottoman castles were not truly Ottoman in origin. Beneath their walls are older Roman foundations, Byzantine tunnels, Crusader chambers, and forgotten hydraulic systems buried under centuries of reconstruction. In several sites across Turkey and the Balkans, excavation layers reveal that Ottoman engineers expanded ancient strongholds instead of starting from nothing. Some fortresses became giant architectural hybrids built across nearly 2,000 years of history. Rumeli Hisari itself was designed for an entirely new age of warfare. Medieval castles had been built to stop arrows and siege ladders, but by the 15th century gunpowder changed everything. Ottoman engineers responded by building lower and thicker defensive walls capable of absorbing artillery impacts. Historical records from the siege of Constantinople in 1453 describe giant bombards firing stone cannonballs weighing hundreds of kilograms. Some projectiles reportedly exceeded 500 kilograms. Fortresses like Rumeli Hisari were designed specifically to control narrow waterways and support these enormous weapons. The Bosphorus at that point narrows to roughly 700 meters, allowing Ottoman artillery to dominate ships attempting to reach Constantinople. The strange part is how advanced some of these defensive systems appear compared to neighboring kingdoms of the same period. Ottoman fortresses often used layered stonework filled internally with compacted earth to absorb shockwaves from cannon fire. Modern military historians compare some of these concepts to later European bastion forts that became common during the Renaissance. Yet several Ottoman structures appeared decades before those designs spread widely across Europe. The engineering becomes even more difficult to explain at Kilit Bahir Castle, built in 1462 near the Dardanelles Strait. Unlike traditional square fortresses, Kilit Bahir contained an unusual clover-shaped central tower system optimized for overlapping artillery fire. The design allowed cannons to cover multiple angles simultaneously against enemy ships moving through the strait. Historians believe this represented one of the earliest large-scale Ottoman adaptations to naval artillery warfare after the conquest of Constantinople, but many mysteries surrounding these castles are underground. Beneath Ottoman ruins, archaeologists repeatedly uncover hidden cisterns, escape tunnels, and buried chambers extending far below visible walls. At Alanya Castle, sections of Byzantine fortifications were found integrated directly beneath Ottoman defences. The fortress rises over 250 meters above the Mediterranean Sea on steep cliffs, making the transport of stone blocks, water, and artillery extremely difficult even today. yet the site maintained large garrisons for centuries. Researchers studying underground systems in Ottoman castles noticed something unusual. In many cases, the deeper sections were older than the Ottoman Empire itself. Drainage channels beneath some fortresses resemble Byzantine hydraulic engineering, while certain stone tunnels may date back to Roman occupation. Rather than replacing ancient systems, Ottoman builders often reused them. This created layered structures where military technology from multiple civilizations existed inside the same fortress. One of the strongest examples is Mamure Castle on the southern coast of Turkey. Although heavily associated with Ottoman rule, the fortress sits on foundations dating back to the Roman period. Byzantine, Armenian, Seljuk and Ottoman builders all expanded different sections over time. The castle contains 39 towers and massive walls exposed directly to Mediterranean saltwater for centuries. Modern engineers studying surviving mortar samples found remarkable resistance to erosion and moisture penetration. Similar durability exists in Roman maritime concrete, which used volcanic ash and lime mixtures capable of chemically strengthening over time underwater. That comparison has created one of the biggest debates surrounding Ottoman construction. Some historians believe Ottoman engineers inherited older Mediterranean building knowledge passed down through Byzantine and Roman traditions. Others argue the Ottomans independently developed their own advanced mortar systems. Laboratory analysis confirmed that several Ottoman mortars contained mixtures of lime, crushed brick, ceramic particles and volcanic materials that improved flexibility and resistance to cracking during earthquakes. Earthquakes themselves may explain why many Ottoman fortresses survived so long. Large parts of Anatolia sit near active fault zones, yet numerous Ottoman walls remain standing after hundreds of years. Some structures used interlocking stone systems capable of distributing seismic stress more effectively than rigid walls. Similar earthquake-resistant concepts also appeared in Byzantine and Roman engineering. The mysteries continue in the Balkans. Smederevo Fortress became one of the Ottoman Empire's largest military centres after its capture in the 15th century. Covering roughly 11 hectares along the Danube River, the fortress contains enormous defensive walls and dozens of towers. Excavations uncovered Roman occupation layers beneath sections of the complex, reinforcing the idea that these locations remain strategically valuable across multiple civilizations for thousands of years. What makes Ottoman castle ruins so compelling is that they are not the remains of a single empire. They are stacked archaeological timelines. Roman foundations support Byzantine tunnels. Byzantine walls support Ottoman artillery towers. Beneath one fortress, archaeologists may uncover traces of 4 or 5 separate civilizations occupying the same ground across 2 millennia.